Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to another GameMaker Studio 2 tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to create a UI slider inside of GameMaker Studio 2. And you'll see a link in the description which contains this project file so you can download it. I've got two sprites here. One of them is the slider bar and the other one is the slider button. The slider bar has two sub-images, one of them which is the empty slider and the other one which is the full slider. The green is for the full one. And you can see this is really important. The origin of the sprite is right here. I've set it to middle left, and the origin of the button is middle center. So once you have those sprites, you can either use them from the project that I include in the description, or you can create your own. Once you have those set up, you're ready to go. I've named mine S_slider bar and S_slider button. Now what we need to do is create some new objects. I'm going to create a new object, and I'm going to name this O_slider_parent. And I'm going to have a parent slider. That way we could create multiple sliders for different things that you want them to affect. And inside of here, I'm going to add an event, add a create event, and we're going to initialize some variables. And the first variable we're going to create is called value. I'm going to put an underscore after my variables just because I like to do that. You don't have to. I'm going to set this equal to 0. Then I'm going to do max value and set that equal to 1. So the maximum value is going to be 1, and then we're going to have a value variable which is whatever our minimum value or whatever our value is set to. We're going to assume a minimum value of 0. We're going to set selected equal to false, and then we'll do image speed equals 0, image index equals 0. Now this just allows us to use only the first image in our sliding bar right here. So we'll just set our image index equal to 0 and our image speed equal to 0. That lets us use only this one right here. So it won't actually animate between the two because we have an image speed of 0 and we set our index to the very first one. Okay. Once we've done that, we need to create a step event. And let's add this right here. Step. Inside this step event, we're going to check for selected. We'll say if, actually this is to check if we're not selected. Maybe no longer is a better way to do it. If not mouse check button MB left selected equals false. So we'll set selected to false. If we are selected though, we're going to make the mouse position, we're going to set the value. Now the value we're going to use, we want to make sure and clamp this value so we can never go below 0 or above the maximum, the max value. So we'll say value equals clamp. And the first value is the actual value that we want to use. And that's going to be our mouse's position. Mouse, well, we're going to put parentheses around this. Mouse x minus x. So it's our mouse's position minus our current position, and that will get us the amount of pixels, but we're setting a value between 0 and 1, right? So we need to divide it by the sprite width, which will be the maximum, that way if this distance right here, if our mouse is at the very end of our sprite, right? If we've got our slider bar and our mouse is right here at the very end, then we're going to basically get our sprite width divided by our sprite width, which is going to be 1, right? But if our mouse is halfway, then we're going to get half the sprite width divided by the sprite width, which is going to be 0.5. So you can see how that works. And that will turn that value from a pixel value to a 0 to 1 value. Once we've done that, we can pass in our minimum value, which is 0, and then our max value, which is going to be 1. Now, if we are selected, what do we want to do? Well, you can manually do something in here, like you could say, okay, we want to affect the scale of a certain sprite or a certain object in the game. So let's do that actually. Let's create a new sprite here. Create a new sprite. I'm going to name this S test. I'm just going to edit the image and paint it. We'll paint it blue for fun. And we'll close out of this, come into our objects. And I'm going to create a new object. We'll name this O_test. Set the blue sprite. That's all we need. Don't need it anymore. Let's minimize the room editor right there. Okay. Don't need that. Don't need that. Okay, we're back in here. We can say if object test exists, object test dot image xscale equals 1 plus value. Object test dot image yscale equals 1 plus value. Okay, but now we actually need to draw this image as well, because currently we're not drawing any of this, and we're also not ever actually selecting it, because we're just checking to see if we're selected. So let's first draw this value. Come into add a new event and a draw event, if I can find it here. Draw. So first we're going to draw this current sprite that we're on, right? So we can just call draw self. That's the quick way to do this. Let's get a little extra room here. Then we need to draw part of our current sprite, but the full one. So that would be the image, that would be the image index of 1. So we're going to say draw sprite part sprite index, and then we're going to obviously do a sub image of 1. Our left value is going to be 0, right value is going to be 0. The width is going to be sprite width times value. The height is going to be sprite height. The x that we're going to draw this at is going to be x, and the y we're going to draw this at is going to be y minus sprite get y offset sprite index semicolon. We're definitely running out of room a little bit here, but what we're doing essentially here, I'm just going to get rid of that for now so we can get a little more room. What we're doing essentially here is we're making sure to draw this sprite, that we're drawing only part of it. We're going to draw only the value amount. So if our value is 0.5, then it's going to draw only half of the sprite width, which will draw obviously our full image, the colored one, only as far as the value has gone. And we want to make sure to draw our Y in the correct position. If we just press Y here, unfortunately, the origin of our sprite, because it's centered, is going to mess this up a little bit. So we need to get the offset to make sure we're drawing it in the correct spot. Now we're going to draw a sprite, S_slider button, and we're going to do our image index will be 0, and our X position will be X plus sprite width times value. So we need to times by value in order to convert this into we need to times by the sprite width in order to convert our value into an actual pixel amount. And then we're going to do y. Okay, we should be correctly drawing this now. And we don't need all this extra room anymore. Let's add a new event. Actually, we might be able to do this in the step event, and that might be the better place to do it. So let's just try this. We'll say up here at the very top, if mouse check button pressed MB left. So if they've pressed the mouse button, we're going to say our var button underscore x equals x plus sprite width times value. So we're going to get our current x position, add the sprite width times the value, and that's going to get our button's x position, because what we need to do is we need to make sure that we need our button's x position, our button's y position, our button's width, and our button's height in order to be able to calculate whether we clicked on the button. And the reason we can't use like a left pressed event or something like that is because the sprite that we're using is the sprite for the slider, but we need to detect a collision for the button. Now you could create a separate object for the button and that would solve this problem, but I decided because our button's going to be basically square just to do the math for it. So var button y equals y, var button width equals sprite get width, sprite or s slider button, var button height equals sprite get height, s slider button. Okay. Once we have that, we can use a function called point in rectangle. If point in, well, actually point in circle might work better for this. Let's try that instead. We'll use point in circle. Now our point's x position is going to be button x, button y, and our circle x and circle y. Well, let's check the documentation for this one. The x coordinate for the point to check, the x coordinate for the point to the check, the x coordinate for the circle center. Okay, so we're doing this wrong. So what we need to do is we need to check first the point that we're checking, and that's going to be the mouse x position and the mouse y position. That's the point that we're checking. Okay? Then we need to set the circle's center, which is going to be button x and button y. Then we need to set the circle's radius. And the easiest way to do this is just to get the button's width and then divide it by 2. That should work. So we'll just do button radius equals sprite get width divided by 2. And then we can just set button radius right here. And we can use that to check to see if we are clicking inside of this button. If we are, we'll just set selected equal to true. Okay, now let's create this. Let's actually put this in the room. So come into room 1. We're going to drag a few test objects into here. We need to make sure we're on the instances layer. Drag a test object in. Holy cow, that is huge already. And let's drag our slider in. I'll just put it right here kind of in the center. I'm thinking maybe we should scale the sprite for the test object. Let's first of all center it. We'll do middle center. And then I'm going to scale it right here. We'll just set its width and height to 32 and 32. Apply. Close out of that and run the project. Hopefully we did everything right. And we've got a mistake here. Value not set before reading it. That's my fault. I've been typing value this whole time without doing the underscore. Silly me. Make sure I put this underscore in here. And let's check to make sure I didn't do the underscore the entire time. Make sure this is good. Yep, that looks good. And step event looks good. Create event also looks good. Should be able to save and run it now. Okay, there we go. Got our slider, and you can see as we slide it, first of all, it draws the other color, and then it scales these objects, which is honestly pretty cool. Like, it's pretty fun to have like a slider like that in your game. Let's see if I can move this. That's odd that it was. This feels a little bit off for some reason. That is really weird. Not sure how I could reproduce this behavior, but regardless, let's put both of these right here. Now, what if we wanted to change something else with the values? Maybe have a different slider, right? So this is our slider parent. So what we're going to actually do here is change this slider parent. Let's come back into our workspace. Inside the slider parent, we're going to add an event. We're going to add an other event, and we're going to go to user events, user event 0. Inside of here, this is going to be the slider event. And in the parent, I'm just going to do show debug message slider event. Okay? And let's get rid of this side right here. Okay, so we've got that. Now inside of here, instead of actually messing with the object test, I'm going to take this out right here. And I'm going to do Control X because I'm going to use it later. We're just going to run this user event that we created. So event user 0. Now that looks good. Now if we run the game again, we're just going to get a debug message down here at the bottom, which tells us that we're running the slider event. And that makes sense because we're not actually doing anything. But then what we can do is we can duplicate our slider parent. So just do duplicate object right here. And in this new one, we can modify this right here. So we give this a parent and we'll select the slider parent. And we'll name this object slider scale. So this one will alter the scale. We can delete all these, we can delete the create event and all this stuff. Wow, that create event doesn't have anything in it. That's not good. Hopefully the actual slider parent does have something in the create event. Okay, good, it does. That's interesting how the duplicate didn't duplicate the create event correctly. Okay. So we now set the parent for this slider, the scale slider, to the slider parent, and we deleted the rest of the events. All we have to do is modify the user event 0 here. So we can just say, paste this back in. If instance exists, object test, do the scale, right? And we come back into our room right here. We're going to delete the parent slider and we're going to add the scale slider. Now that we've done that, everything should work exactly the same, except we can duplicate this, the scale slider, and close out of the scale slider, open up the duplicated one, and instead of doing the scale right here, we could do something else. So let's say it's o_test dot x position. Let's modify the x position equals o_test dot x start plus scale, plus value times 10. Okay? And then we'll name this one, instead of slider scale, we can name it slider X. Okay? This is just an example. But then we can come into our room and we can drag in slider X right here. And when we run the game, we should have two sliders. One of them will modify the scale of the object, while the other one modifies the X position of the object. And unfortunately, because we're using the way that we're actually getting the object that we want to modify, it's working in a global way. We're not actually assigning it to that exact position. So that's why it jumped one of them over to the position, because we're getting the X start position, which is grabbing the first slider. The way that you could do this would be to say with object test. This way we loop through each individual object instead of just grabbing the first one like this. But then you have to do other.value to access the value variable inside of this scope right here, inside of the scope of our slider. Because if we just try to do value underscore X inside of the test object, it would say, I don't know what that is. But if we do other.value, it says, okay, we're inside of a with statement, jump outside the with statement and grab the scope outside of there. That's what other allows us to do. Now if we run it, we should be able to modify the X position for the objects using these sliders. And you can see using the point in circle actually works pretty well for clicking on these correctly. So that's all for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you found it helpful. If you did, be sure and like this video, share it on Facebook or Twitter, and I will talk to you guys later.